Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. So if you've been in a bookshop any time in the last year, you won't have failed to notice The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry, which has been on bestseller lists, and it won Waterson's Book of the Year 2016, so it's really been everywhere. I'd seen it around loads of times and I was so drawn by its gorgeous cover, but I had such a backlog of books that I managed to resist buying it until fairly recently, but I am so glad that I finally got around to reading it. It has a really compelling plot, a gorgeous writing style, and for me the most impressive thing about it was that it showed a real insight into the livelihoods of Victorian people. So in brief, it follows the story of Cora Seaborn, who is a recently widowed woman who moves in 1893 with her son from the oppressive confines of London to the marshes of Essex, and she's drawn by the resurfacing of an ancient legend. I'm not going to talk about any of the real specifics of the plot of the novel, so there won't be any spoilers in this video, but I do want to talk more about its representation of Victorian society because that is what I found most interesting about the novel. Firstly, the writing style itself came as a bit of a surprise to me because as a contemporary best-selling novel I expected it to be written in a similar style, but it actually has a style that is more befitting of a novel written in the time period where it's set. I definitely felt it had a Dickensian ring in the flow of the sentences, and it has a kind of satire that's maybe not quite as pointed as Thackeray, but it definitely has a thread running through it of a criticism of society that you do see in a lot of Victorian novels. Its cast of characters itself captures a broad slice of Victorian life in its inclusion of a rebellious widowed woman, a gracious wife in Stella, a religious cleric who is concerned by the changing relationship between science and religion, and a surgeon who is himself redefining the relationship between life and death using modern medicine. You can see the impact of Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species just in the description of the flora and fauna of the Essex landscape, and in particular Cora's real interest in fossils. In 400 pages, Sarah Perry not only tells the story of the Essex Serpent, but really ponders on a lot of the issues that were present in Victorian society, and in that way I found it a really rich novel and there was something to think about on every page. As I just mentioned, it's very interested in scientific advances and the ideas posed by prominent theorists of the time, and of course the impact that this had on religious views. This is a struggle that the cleric William Ransom faces in this novel, but I like the fact that he's not a single-faceted character on a tirade against enlightenment, and shortly after meeting Cora, he says about her interest in the legend of the Essex Serpent. He calls it a wealthy woman's dabbling in the natural sciences, probably to the detriment of her spiritual health. But despite their differences and her obvious atheism, they do manage to put aside these differences and become friends, even though they do of course bicker about their differing beliefs. I found William a sympathetic character, not a stereotype of a religious man who's unable to move with the times, but of a real human who's trying to make his religious views coincide with the reality of a changing world in which scientific ideas can no longer reasonably be denied. Cora says it's a shame that William, in a modern age, a man could impoverish his intellect enough to satisfy himself with myth and legend, and she's of course referring to his religious beliefs, but there is definitely an undertone of irony there since she can't help but be infected by the superstitious thrill of the myth of the Essex Serpent. Again, this shows a conflict in ideology between science and superstition, and although Cora is a rational woman who likes to see the Essex Serpent as more of a relic of the dinosaur age, she can't help but be drawn into the mythology surrounding it, and the reality is that the people of Aldwinter are genuinely terrified of this mythical Loch Ness Monster type creature, and I think it does speak about a truth of Victorian society that many people still were drawn in by these myths and legends, and because so many of them were illiterate, the work of people like Charles Darwin was really lost on them. Of course, one of the reasons that Cora's not taken entirely seriously is because she's a woman, and it's not exactly a revelation to hear that in Victorian society women were heavily constrained by societal demands and the ways that they were meant to dress and behave in society. It's made no secret in the novel that Cora's husband, Michael, was unkind to her, and she feels freed rather than lost by his death. She says, "I forget to think of myself as a woman. All the obligations and comforts of womanhood seem to have nothing to do with me now." It's clear that she views womanhood as something defined by wifely duty and the obligation of beauty, but she really has no desire to return to that lifestyle, and she's happy to act and dress like a man even if others judge her for it. She says she dislikes her body because it betrays her gender, and says, "I don't live in it, I live up here in my mind and words," which I think was particularly good, the idea that she's trying to get away from her physical being and be taken seriously as a person, not be just dismissed as a woman. While she might seem a bit of an anomaly in Victorian literature, I think the point Sarah Perry is trying to make is that not all Victorian women are weak-willed, and a lot of them did genuinely have an interest in politics and in science and literature, and they wanted to be allowed to be part of the conversation about these topics. Martha, Cora'S friend, has an active interest in London politics, and in particular trying to improve housing for poor people, and this is an aspect that is really important in Victorian culture and literature, the growing divide between the rich and poor, and the social criticism in the literature that talks about these issues, and it's something that is definitely as important today as it was back then. I also really enjoyed reading about the character of Luke Garrett, who's a surgeon who's aspiring to perform heart surgery in this novel. The reception he receives when he plans to make this kind of operation again really shows the fears about what medical science really means for religion, when death can be prevented in a way that it never has been before, and the heart, the organ involved in this type of operation, no longer stands as a symbol of love or the casement of the soul, but is a real pulsating organ that can be prodded and poked and cut apart and stitched back together again. The novel also deals with tuberculosis and the horrible effects that the medicine had on patients who were suffering from it, and I thought it was really well done. I don't want to talk too much about it because it would be too much of a spoiler, but I think Sarah Perry really dealt with that issue particularly well. Cora'S friendships in the novel with Luke, Martha, William and his wife Stella, among others, are really key to the novel, I think, and it shows that they can put aside their differences, which are quite significant in some cases, and be friends regardless, as you can in the present day. As a reader, you get a lot of insights into these friendships through the letters that are inserted through the novel, and I really like this epistolary format. I felt like you could really see a less formal side to them in their letters, and they would chat and have jokes as well as talking about, more serious topics. Overall, I thought that Sarah Perry's depiction of Victorian society complicates the view that it was a time of entirely conflicting ideas, and that science and religion could never see eye to eye, and women were always meek and subservient. I think it was gorgeously written, and some of the landscapes and the seasons are brought quite literally to life by the writing, and they are personified in a way that almost gives them narrative agency within the text. I'm actually filming this video on the day of the general election in the UK, and I think my reading of the novel has definitely been coloured by the political discourse of the last few months. It's not altogether a reassuring position when a novel set in the Victorian era has so many parallels with modern day Britain, with a continuing housing crisis, with lack of affordable housing and satisfactory housing for families, the continued need for food banks, and not to mention attitude towards women that is still perhaps antiquated. It's not all bad though, and I think at least medicine has improved a lot since the time period described in this novel. I think it does really highlight the importance of institutions like the NHS. This novel, like so many others, looks to the past to make points about our present day life and where we're heading in the future, and I found it a really thought-provoking read. If anything, I wish it could have been longer so I could have delved deeper into the characters' ambitions and backstories and find out more about where they were heading in the future, but I suppose that's why Charles Dickens' novels are all so long. So I'll end it there, and I'd really like to hear what you thought if you've read this book. There's so much in it to talk about that there's more than I really could in a short video, but do let me know what you thought. I've got some videos planned for the upcoming weeks, so check back next week for my next one. And of course you can subscribe if you want to keep updated. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!